Coming up next, we're taking the time machine back to the summer of love, the birth of psychedelia, and the year when music truly became art. I'm telling you, we've got 11 of the greatest songs of that magical time, including a scruffy 16-year-old kid who won a high school talent show, and he got to record this short 2-minute song. It ended up hitting number 1 and outdoing the Beatles. Then there was a revolutionary song that came from a rookies band that took us decades to realize was actually a supergroup who spawned many legendary bands. And then there was a song that was written by an iconic singer from his perspective as a man, just wanting some appreciation from his woman. That's what the song was about. But then a woman covered it, changed the song's gender, and made it an all-time female anthem. You're not going to believe it when you hear what the song is. And then there was the number 1 band who had 2 prolific writers who each wrote a masterpiece and were in competition to see whose song would be the hit. So they just released them on the same single. It became the greatest double-sided hit ever. Legendary guests and stories coming up next on the top 11 songs of 1967 on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you remember jumping out of your chair when you were playing Operation as a kid because it would buzz when you'd hit the side, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. I know you're going to dig this channel. We also have a podcast you're going to want to check out. It's on Apple and Spotify. You can click up here or click below. We've got all of our episodes there, plus some special exclusives. So 1967, the magical summer of love, the first chapter of psychedelia, and a year when music obliterated conventional boundaries, I'm telling you. From flower power to fuzz pedals, sitars to soul shouters. It was the year that rock grew up. Pop got a little weird, and some cool legends were born. Our countdown of the top 11 songs of 67 starts at number 11. It's the accidental pop hit that Van Morrison tried to bury, Brown-Eyed Girl, at number 11.
A brown-eyed girl.
Brown-Eyed Girl is, of course, one of the most beloved and instantly recognizable songs of the entire 20th century. It's a tune that feels like summer. So it feels like first love. It feels like pure freedom. And it's all rolled into 3 minutes. But for the man who wrote it, Van Morrison, it was never supposed to be a hit. For years, he didn't even want to talk about it. He loathed it. The entire human race loves it. He hates it. In 1967, Van Morrison had just left his Belfast band, Them. He was struggling to find his footing as a solo artist. He signed with legendary producer and hustler Burt Burns. He's the man behind hits like Twist and Shout and Piece of My Heart. Now, Burns brought Van to New York and basically locked him into a studio with a team of session musicians. In one marathon session, Van Morrison recorded 8 tracks, including the jangly feel-good tune originally titled Brown Skin Girl. That was the original title. It was inspired by the Caribbean rhythm and lyrical imagery of the tune. Van later claimed that he changed the title either by accident or under pressure from the label, depending on which version of the story that you believe. There's a few out there. The song was released as Brown-Eyed Girl, and it took off. It actually only peaked at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, but it didn't need to be number 1 to become immortal. Now, over time, it became a fixture on classic rock radio and prom playlists and wedding receptions and beach bonfire soundtracks. It's been streamed and played literally millions and millions of times, and it sold 2 million copies right off the bat. However, Van Morrison didn't see a dime in royalties from it because of the terms of his shady deal with Burns and Bang Records. Morrison, he was locked out of the profits. Even worse, Burns died suddenly the same year, leaving Van tangled in lawsuits and contract disputes that haunted him for years. He later called that period a screw job and distanced himself from the song, even leaving it off his set list for long stretches. But in the end, Brown-Eyed Girl is more than just nostalgic ear candy. It's a moment in time, a golden snapshot of youth, love, and lost innocence. A song Van Morrison didn't want to define him necessarily, but ended up capturing the hearts of the generations. Sliding in number 10 on our countdown of the top 11 of 67, it's a one-hit wonder that set the charts on fire. Talk about A Little Bit of Soul by the Music Explosion. The summer of 67, right in the middle of the psychedelic revolution and the summer of love, something totally unexpected shot up the charts. While the airwaves were saturated with dreamy soundscapes from the likes of the Doors and Jefferson Airplane. A scrappy band out of Mansfield, Ohio came screaming out of nowhere with a garage rock scorcher titled Little Bit of Soul, and it just wouldn't be denied. It's such a great song. Written in 1964 by British songwriters John Carter and Ken Lewis, who also wrote hits for Herman's Hermits and the Ivy League, Little Bit of Soul was first recorded by an obscure UK group called the Little Darlings. But when producer Jerry Cassanetes and Jeff Katz, pioneers of what would later be called bubblegum pop, got their hands on it, they thought it had a lot of potential, so they handed it off to a group of shaggy young guys from Ohio with a punky energy and a raw, no-nonsense sound. And the result was Bottle Lightning. We should have covered this in more detail on Bottle Lightning. Let me know if we should. With its opening fuzz tone guitar riff, tambourine slaps, and snarling vocals from frontman Jamie Lyons. Little Bit of Soul blasted out of radios like a punch in the chest. It wasn't refined, it wasn't polished, catchy as hell though. And listeners couldn't get enough of the rebellious spirit of that song. Little Bit of Soul was a lone hit by the Music Explosion, but it was a big one. It went to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and went all the way to number 1 in Canada, selling over 1 million copies. At number 9 with a bullet is a song that was denied many times by record label trailblazer Berry Gordy, before it finally became one of the most celebrated of the rock era. Talking about Marvin Gaye's definitive rendition, Heard It Through the Grapevine. This one's got a great story. Let me set it up. So it was back in 1966 in the Windy City of Chicago. Singer-songwriter Barrett Strong overheard some folks talking. Now, he wasn't eavesdropping necessarily. He was just, kind of soaking in the vibes down Michigan Avenue when he happened to be standing next to some folks that were gathered around having a spirited conversation. One of them was talking a little trash, spreading some gossip to the group around him, and when he was asked where he'd heard the rumor, he responded, "I heard it through the grapevine." Bam! That phrase hit Barrett like a jolt of electricity. He's like, damn, that's a great title for a song. And the inspiration for a future classic had been activated right then and there. Barrett started writing Heard It Through the Grapevine in a gospel-flavored Ray Charles style, but he didn't get too far along before he realized he needed some help. So he went to the vaunted composing trio of Holland Dozier Holland, Motown's all-star writing team. But they refused to give a credit to an outside writer. That was their deal. Barrett then presented it to another Motown writer, the up-and-comer Norman Whitfield. The other executives at Motown, including Berry Gordy, thought Heard It Through the Grapevine had limited appeal. The consensus was that the song was too bluesy. It lacked hit potential. Norman Whitfield, he was the lone exception. He loved the song and enthusiastically teamed up with Barrett Strong to finish it. Marvin Gaye's version of Heard It Through the Grapevine was actually the second one recorded in early '67 as a track to include on Marvin's 8th studio album, In the Groove. Marvin didn't have as much say in how the song turned out compared to other songs he had performed on. He had that right before. Norman had a clear vision for exactly what he wanted Marvin's interpretation of Grapevine to be. Whitfield took a sweet time recording the song with Gaye, spanning over 5 sessions from early February '67 to mid-April '67. The process was really quite involved, lasting more than a month. Now, Whitfield layered Marvin's vocals with those of the Andante's background vocals. He incorporated multiple tracks featuring the Funk Brothers on the rhythm track and enlisted the string section from the Detroit Symphony Orchestra with an arrangement by Paul Reiser. During another of those famous executive meetings at Motown, there was a conversation about what songs should be the lead single off Marvin's new album, In the Groove. There was a lot of discussion that went back and forth. Norman lobbied hard for I Heard It Through the Grapevine, more convinced than ever before that it would be a huge hit for Marvin. But for the 4th time, Berry Gordy said no dice. The song had already been a major hit for Gladys and the Pips. And Berry was adamant that You should be the single because it was in line with Marvin's romantic vein, what he was going for. He refused to change his mind about I Heard It Through the Grapevine, going as far as saying the song sucked. Meanwhile, a DJ at WVON in Chicago discovered Marvin's version. He started playing it as an album track from In the Groove. The phones went crazy. Berry Gordy could no longer deny that I Heard It Through the Grapevine was going to be a smash. His entire label was built around making radio hits, so it was released, and I Heard It Through the Grapevine. It was put out as a single. History was written. Now, Marvin explained to New Music Express that he followed Whitfield's direction because he believed it was the right approach, despite many arguments between Norman and the iconic singer. The interpretation of I Heard It Through the Grapevine by Gladys Knight and the Pips, that moved all the way to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, but actually Marvin Gaye's version made it a cultural masterpiece, climbing to number 1 in the UK and the Billboard Hot 100. It was a number 1 and a number 2 hit for 2 different artists. Crazy. Back to the top 11 songs of 67 countdown. We're skipping the Life Fandango, and we're going with Wider Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, coming in at number 8. Oh, this is such a masterpiece. I've always loved the melancholy organ intro of Wider Shade of Pale. It sounds like a classic, mystical Bach piece from centuries ago. And then in floats Gary Brooker's soulful, solemn voice, delivering surreal lyrics.
Skip the light fandango.
That her face at first just ghostly turned a wider shade of pale.
That her face at first just ghostly.
The lyrics are interestingly mysterious, which is part of the reason the song casts a spell on the listener and did it from the very beginning. Procol Harum was formed in the UK in '67, basically as a studio project led by pianist Gary Brooker and lyricist Keith Reid. Reid, who never actually performed with the band, was more like a poet in residence. He wrote nearly all the words, drawing from Bob Dylan and classical literature and obscure turns of phrase. Actually, Wider Shade of Pale was based on a line someone had said at a party. Reid scribbled it down in his notebook that he always had with him. The rest followed in kind of a literary fever dream.
It's plain to see.
Song that was like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. It was very complex in the end, and the song was actually 10 minutes long. It had so many layers and lyrical twists and turns, it was like a foreign film. The problem is, when it was time for the radio to play it, they're not going to play a song that long. They played 4-minute songs at the most. So they had to figure out how to trim it. That meant leaving 2 whole verses on the cutting room floor. But it became the de facto hit of 1967. In fact, when Paul McCartney heard it, he freaked out. It didn't sound like anything on radio, and it ended up selling 10 million copies, even though nobody could pronounce the band's name. It grabbed the number 1 position on the charts in nearly every country. It also went to number 1 in Canada and peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Procol Harum had a few other mild hits overseas, but didn't return to the U.S. Top 40 in the U.S. until '72, with the number 16 single, Conquistador. Coming in at number 7, it's one of the best feel-good tunes of the rock era, Happy Together by the Turtles. Now, the spring of 1967, a quirky little band from Los Angeles did the unthinkable. At the height of Beatlemania, they knocked the Beatles off the top of the charts with a love song with a comedic twist called Happy Together. It was never supposed to be a hit at all. Now, the Turtles had already carved out a reputation as a fun-loving group with folk rock roots and a tongue-in-cheek attitude. But behind the scenes, they were desperate for a hit. Their last few singles had flopped, and their label was starting to lose patience with them. That's when a demo showed up, written by a pair of struggling New York songwriters, Gary Bonner and Alan Gordon. The Turtles almost didn't record it. In fact, everybody turned this demo down. The original demo was rough. It was just a scratch vocal and a basic guitar track. I mean, the guy was playing drums with his hands. We talked about this a few months ago, but the demo was so bad that Alan Gordon offered the guitarist in his band at the time, a guy named Alan Jacobs, a share of the songwriting credit since it was based on his guitar progression. To Gordon's surprise, though, Jacobs turned him down cold, dismissing Happy Together as being too simple, just a dumb song. It was a fateful decision, though, one that cost him a fortune in royalties, millions. In the end, though, the world's worst demo was barely enough because lead singer Howard Kaylan heard something special in the song. The lyrics were simple and sweet, an anthem for every daydreamer who ever imagined the perfect romance.
Imagine how the world could be so very fine, so happy.
But man, when they got in the studio, the Turtles turned that bare bones demo into a Technicolor daydream. They layered harmonies like a West Coast Beach Boys, stacked lush orchestration over the verses, and then exploded into that joyful offbeat sing-along chorus. Happy Together, it was released in February of '67, and it went all the way, straight to number one. It stayed there for 3 weeks, knocking Penny Lane by the Beatles off the top of the Billboard Hot 100. It became the Turtles' signature song, selling over 1 million copies and instantly etching its way into pop culture. The crazy part of the mega success of Happy Together is that it's actually not a happy song. It's really all just a fantasy where a guy's imagining what will make him happy. But the reality, it eludes him. Might be the catchiest song of all time, let's be honest. So back to the countdown of the top 11 songs of '67 at number 6. I've got Light My Fire by The Doors. Seemed like everything that Jim Morrison and The Doors did sparked some kind of controversy. But as guitarist Robbie Krieger explained to me, that's the way The Doors liked it, especially pushing the envelope with Light My Fire. A lot of people don't know that Robbie wrote a lot of Light My Fire. Here's what he told me.
At one point, we only had 10 or 12 songs. And he said, well, why don't you guys write some? You know, why am I the only guy that has to do all the work? Okay, so I picked Fire because I always loved the Stones song, Play with Fire.
Play with me 'cause you're playing with fire.
So when you brought it to the band, what was their reaction? Take us to that moment.
They dug it. They dug it a lot, you know. We decided somehow to do a solo part, you know, and I said, well, okay, I'll do a solo. And Ray goes, no, I want to do a solo, you know. So we both ended up doing a solo. When we played Ed Sullivan and they didn't want us to say she can't get much higher.
Girl, we couldn't get much higher.
Boy, high was a bad word back in those days. We didn't even think they were serious. I swear to God, it was so stupid. You know, we can't get much higher, big deal. So we said, let's just do it. Do it.
Girl, we couldn't get much higher.
It's crazy because Light My Fire was only a flicker in the UK. It stalled at number 49, but it raced to number 2 in Canada and went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and put the Doors on the map here. Halfway through the countdown, the song at number 5 of 1967 is one that shocked the competition. Now, what were you doing when you were 16? Well, Alex Chilton was winning a local talent contest, and despite having no professional experience, he was chosen to be the lead vocalist in a band called the Box Tops, with a record that not only hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, but also became the second biggest single of that crazy competitive year of '67. It charted higher than the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, the Monkees. The Letter by the Box Tops, it became the shortest song ever to top the charts.
Ticket for an aeroplane. Ain't got time to take a fast.
Alex Chilton was only 16 years old when he delivered the extraordinary vocal on The Letter. Like I said, the song was not even 2 minutes long, and the Box Tops, the group he fronted, was a quintet of virtual unknowns from the Memphis area. It's one of the great underdog stories of the 60s for sure. Now, the Box Tops were originally called the DeVilles, but they had to change their name to avoid confusion with a New York City-based band with the same name. Dan Penn and his writing partner Wayne Carson Thompson had just finished composing The Letter. This was a short, snappy, and soulful song, and they were under desperate urgency to find the right vocalist to convey the right emotion in the song. It needed total grit. Dan was working with the newly renamed Box Tops after Alex Chilton had won that talent contest at Central High School in Memphis. Gave him the chance to record The Letter. To Dan's credit, he heard a gifted quality in Alex Chilton's vocal style. It's just something you can't teach.
Lonely days are gone, I'm a-going home. My baby just wrote me.
I love stories like this. I mean, even though he was just a scraggly teenager with no worldly experience, Alex Chilton sang as if he'd gone through all kinds of emotional pain. Besides the fact that he was barely old enough to have a driver's license, Alex had never sung lead in a studio before. He was understandably nervous. He didn't know how to phrase for a microphone at all. But once the track started rolling, that voice came out, and it wasn't the voice of a teenager. It sounded like a road-weary soul man who'd lived through heartbreak and hung out on the wrong side of town his whole life. The track owned the top spot on the Billboard Hot 100 for 4 weeks, and it's become a classic.
My baby just wrote me a letter.
So returning to the countdown of the top 11 songs of 67, I've got the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, with R-E-S-P-E-C-T at number 4.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, find out what it means to me.
You know, respect started as a man's plea for appreciation at home. But in the incredible voice of Aretha Franklin, it became a battle cry for women, for Black America, for everybody who ever felt dissed and overlooked. With a voice that could cut through steel, she turned a simple soul tune into one of the most powerful anthems in music history.
What you want, baby, I got.
So rewinding to 1965, Otis Redding, the king of Southern soul, he was on a creative roll. He writes a song called Respect, and it's about a working man coming home asking his woman for some dignity. Just for a bit of love, a little bit of respect. Now, in Otis Redding's version, it's a man's world. He's the breadwinner. He just wants a little gratitude for bringing home the bacon. Now, don't get me wrong, Otis's original is fantastic, but it was elevated to a whole other level when legendary producer Jerry Wexler brought the song to Aretha Franklin. And in just 2 takes in the studio, she flipped it inside out and she turned it into her song, her commandment. Respect evolved into more than just a hit 45. It was a movement. Women adopted it as a powerful anthem. Even men couldn't resist its dynamic power. Respect shot to number 1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and the R&B charts. It earned Aretha her first 2 Grammys, and the world appropriately crowned her the Queen of Soul. Now, coming in at number 3 on the top 11 songs of 67 is another feel-good sing-along classic. For my money, the most infectious song ever recorded. I've got the association with Wendy and those hypnotic stormy eyes.
And Wendy has stormy eyes.
Wendy was written by Ruth Ann Friedman. She was introduced to the members of the association by Beach Boys collaborator Van Dyke Parks. The connection led to the second number 1 single for the association, one of the most underrated groups ever. Here's what Jim Yester and Jules Alexander shared about crafting Wendy into a pop culture sensation.
One of the few songs that when we recorded, you just knew. Others you thought, this has got a shot.
Or you didn't think, you
Yeah.
didn't think no, but it would anyway.
This one, there was no doubt. We finished at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when we were supposed to go to the airport and go on the road. And we had a rough demo of it. And we played it when we got to the gig. We played it on the house sound system, and we were all dancing around in the aisles.
And Wendy has stormy eyes.
Hal Blaine played drums on it.
Airbrains.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Airbrain. I tell you, those guys, that was the deal. A lot of people didn't know it, and the managers tried to hide it. But we worked with the Wrecking Crew for those 2 albums, Inside Out and Birthday. And I tell you, it was the most fun. Those guys were so cool.
Just pros.
And, you sit down, you go through the song the first time, and they were just so cool. Oh, okay, yeah, well, let me try this, and they just instantly, and you go, holy cow. And it was fun. It was great fun, and the results were just phenomenal.
The association's Wendy also made it to number 1 in Canada, number 6 in New Zealand, and number 14 in South Africa. Coming in at the coveted number 2 bridesmaid position on our count of the top 11 of 67, I've got the supergroup, we didn't know it was a supergroup for a few years, Buffalo Springfield with For What It's Worth. While he was a member of the short-lived all-star act Buffalo Springfield, the band that, like I said, we didn't realize was a supergroup for years, Stephen Stills wrote For What It's Worth. He channeled inspiration from the Sunset Strip curfew riots in Los Angeles. A few years back, Stephen invited me to his home in the hills of Mulholland, and he told me the story of For What It's Worth, one of the greatest songs ever.
I looked down upon the scene and I said, turn the car around. I wasn't driving, a friend of mine was driving. He said, why? Because there's nothing good going to happen down there.
1,000 people in the street.
We turned around and went back to Topanga to get my guitar, and I kind of had the words written half in my head as we were driving out, and I wrote this song in a much shorter time than it takes to tell the story. Basically, I wrote down the words that had come to my head to the slick that I'd been fooling with.
Something happening here. What it is.
The song title, For What It's Worth, tell us that story, because there's always been the urban legend about handing the tape to Ahmet Ertegun, and you said...
For What It's Worth, here's a new song. There's something happening here, which would be the obvious title, or Stop Children, What's That Sound, or Look What... just nothing ever lent it to a title.
Ahmet Ertegun, who was the president of Atlantic Records, came out to L.A. to hear what kind of songs we had for another album. They were ready to go. They played some songs, so I played some songs, Stephen played some songs, and as we're packing up our instruments, I can hear Stephen right now say, oh, I got another one For What It's Worth. That was...
Buffalo Springfield was only a band for a few years, but For What It's Worth has a legacy, huge legacy. It became one of the most significant songs of the rock era, a song we still sing today. Went to number 5 in Canada and number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 back in the day.
Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
All right, it's time to reveal the selection for the number 1 spot on our countdown of the top 11 songs of 1967. It was a no-brainer. I'm sure you've guessed it by now. At number 1 on our countdown, I've got the Beatles with the cinematic melding of Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, the greatest double A-side in history.
Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. Strawberry fields forever.
And it reflects 2 visions of childhood by the most prolific writing duo of the rock era. Paul McCartney reminiscing about Penny Lane.
Penny Lane, there is a fireman with an hourglass, and in his pocket
And John Lennon fondly recounting the magical strawberry fields of his youth.
take you down, 'cause I'm going to.
Okay, so after the release of the Revolver album, the Beatles got away from the rabid screaming crowds and, they just stopped touring. They decided to live in the studio with the freedom to reinvent themselves. John came into the sessions with a heartwarming yet abstract tune he titled Strawberry Fields Forever. John's memories of a real orphanage near his home where he used to climb trees and escape from his troubled childhood. In the studio, John recorded multiple takes, each drastically different. One version was dreamlike and sparse, the other heavier and more orchestral. John had a hard time deciding what the vibe of the song really should be, so Sir George Martin did something bold, and he combined the 2 different takes that were at different speeds and keys into one seamless theatrical track. George's brilliance spawned a new kind of studio wizardry. Tape loops, backward instruments, mellotron flutes. This was psychedelic pop as fine art. Even John's lead vocal, it was otherworldly.
Nothing is real.
Paul McCartney heard John's Strawberry Fields and raised him Penny Lane, a song that was also rooted in Liverpool, named after the street where Paul used to catch the bus as a kid. It seems simple enough, but when the Beatles and George Martin began to work on the song together, it too became a trailblazing track. Instead of mellotrons and tape loops, Penny Lane had Bach trumpets, Baroque piano, and rich harmonies.
Penny Lane is in my ears.
With Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, the Beatles were tapping into their childhoods, but painting 2 totally different pictures. George Martin once called it the nearest thing to a Lennon-McCartney competition. And neither genius blinked here.
She's in a play. She is anyway. Living is easy with eyes closed.
EMI wanted a new Beatles single to hold fans over while the band worked on their next album, which would become Sgt. Pepper. They were in a race with the Beach Boys to create the greatest album of all time. The Beach Boys were doing Smile.
I love the colorful clothes you wear.
So in February 67, they released both songs on a double A-sided single. The industry had never seen anything like this. 2 tracks that could have anchored any album. 2 musical visions that pushed the limits of what pop could be. And let's be honest, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band has been named the greatest album ever on many lists. And it could have had the greatest double-sided single ever on it. And they didn't put it on the album. Only the Beatles. So get this, the single peaked at number 2 in the UK. It was actually the first single since Love Me Do not to hit number 1 for the Beatles. Now, the song that kept that double A-sided mega single from the top spot was Release Me by Engelbert Humperdinck.
Release me and let me.
Anyway, that completes the countdown of the top 11 songs of 1967. Very interesting year indeed. Which song did you prefer, Penny Lane or Strawberry Fields? Looking forward to reading your comments below. Let's have a great celebration. What's your top 10 of 67? Is it the greatest year in pop music history? This is one of those years that's thrown out like 1984 and 1971 and 1966. And let me know. It's seriously, since I've been doing these countdowns, I will tell you that the 60s are the hardest decades to do, the hardest years, because they could have like 50 songs in the top 10. Just my 2 cents. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe below. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, the chords and the truth, my friends.